In 1854, John Snow noted that, "The most terrible outbreak of cholera which ever occurred in this kingdom, is probably that which took place in Broad Street, Golden Square and the adjoining streets, a few weeks ago." Within 250 yards of the spot where Cambridge Street joins Broad Street, there were upwards of 500 fatal attacks of cholera in 10 days. Snow tabulated the number of deaths from cholera that occurred from the commencement of the epidemic in August 1853 to January 1854 according to the two water companies supplying the various subdistricts of London. The areas of London supplied entirely by the Southwark and Vauxhall Company experienced a rate of 114 deaths from cholera per 100,000 persons, whereas there were no deaths from cholera during that time in the districts supplied entirely by the Lambeth Company. A large area supplied by both companies experienced a rate midway between those for the districts supplied by either alone. These observations were consistent with Snow's hypothesis that drinking water supplied by the Southwark and Vauxhall Company increased the risk of cholera compared with water from the Lambeth Company. Snow also recognized the possibility that many factors other than the water supply differed between the two geographic areas and thus could account for the observed variation in cholera rates. His unique contribution to epidemiology lies in his recognition of an opportunity to test the hypothesis implicating the water supply. Snow outlined his natural experiment in his book on the mode of communication of cholera. Within the area supplied by both companies, Snow walked from house to house and, for every dwelling in which a cholera death had occurred, was able to determine which company supplied the water. The death rates from cholera according to source of water supply were tabulated. These data provided Snow with convincing evidence that water supplied by the Southwark and Vauxhall Company was responsible for the outbreak of cholera in London. Thus, Snow charted the frequency and distribution of cholera and also ascertained a cause, or determinant, of the outbreak. In so doing, he was perhaps the first investigator to draw together all three components of the definition of epidemiology. Snow's investigation of the cholera epidemic of 1853 to 1854 utilized the approach that epidemiologists still use today. Both his clinical knowledge and observations concerning the distribution of cholera rates helped formulate the hypothesis that the disease was spread through the water supply. He then proceeded to test this hypothesis, while recognizing the need to allow for evaluation of alternative explanations for his observations. This approach was applied primarily to outbreaks of infectious diseases throughout the 19th and early 20th centuries. Thus, the term epidemiology was originally used almost exclusively to mean the study of epidemics of infectious disease. Over the past 80 years, patterns of mortality in developed countries have changed markedly, with chronic diseases assuming increasing importance. As a consequence, the concept of an epidemic has become much broader and more complex, necessitating more advanced methods than those first developed by Snow.